Now, there is one slight concern that I have seen echoed in a bit of feedback, which is that the runes are, which is mitigated with more Artificer's Orbs for sure, but the runes are creating a bit of a sense of making it like the thing with that the PoE1 sockets created, which is like replacing items becoming slightly harder.
Yep.
So there's a little bit of just making sure we're careful about that as well. But being able to have more Artificer's Orbs and thus socket more gear will
supposed to be yellow.
mitigate that, so that when you get your upgrade, you're able to add a socket to it.
But I would say that it's definitely the hard-coded drops that would be the thing that, because if it's not happening to everyone, then it is a thing that will, that would be better off solving that way.
But yeah, the caster weapons getting rune sockets and obviously runes for them, and adding more deterministic Artificer's Orbs to the campaign is certainly two things on my immediate radar to help at least mitigate some of this. I might do a quick review on the power pass of the runes as well. I just don't want them to be too much about giving damage, but it might be a lot of the more utility and defensive ones are just on the weak side, and those can certainly come up immediately.
Well, the problem that you have, once again, is that, like, so I sort of mentioned this earlier, but if the tools that you have are too powerful, then the people who know to use them are benefited to a larger degree compared to people who don't, and what you're doing there is then you end up in a situation where content will, be like, it's just a new player goes into this and it's like, well, I didn't know about this, and then like you get screwed over. And so like things like even nodes on the passive tree can be this way, where it's like, okay, well, you had to know to pick this, and if you didn't know to do that, then you're screwed, right? Like that's the kind of thing that's like a bit of a problem. And so that we just have to be really careful about that. And like that's actually one of the reasons, by the way, why lesser runes exist, because if you knew to put a lightning damage rune in your weapon, then you would just like completely like ridiculous compared to anyone who didn't know that. And so it's like you've got like, it shouldn't be that just a single, like there's a tool like that which you just with knowledge alone, it's like you're completely like you're completely overpowered compared to other people. So you just have to be like, we just have to be really careful with that stuff.
Well,
it's important. It's also
oh, no, you're gone.
it's just important to make sure that the solutions are very front-facing, because that passive tree stuff, in PoE1, sure, I agreed, and it seems obvious to a bunch of people, but then also there's two problems going on there in the PoE1, which is it adds to a sense of complexity, because it's like, here are the things you must know before you start playing to have a good time, and I know that's one small piece of that puzzle or that problem. And the second thing is, looking at PoE1 from that crafting bench, is that the crafting bench is in your hideout and
that's what Zizaran,
not in any town, which I agree is a downside. Ideally, it would be more in your face. And so, like, a lot of people just forget to use it and forget that it exists. And that is a thing where, like, again, if you know, you know, and you have a good time, and if you don't know, you don't know, and you like, suffering. So whatever the solutions end up being, we definitely need to make sure are, like, very front-facing, in your face, and are, like, here's clearly the very intuitive way to solve these problems. So that's just an important piece of like philosophy we need to make sure we maintain.
A lot of that can be solved through quests though, right? You can have an NPC early giving one of those like runes and even telling you like, hey, chuck this in your weapon for more damage if you're using a bow.
It would, I mean, surely if the runes are there to solve problems, then ideally we're not telling you exactly which one to use, right? Because it should be dependent on what your problem is. But we do need to make sure that people have got enough Artificer's Orbs to make sure they can do that.
Yeah, but you were talking about the problem that you're rewarded for knowledge, which I don't think necessarily is a bad thing. I think that is a good thing.
No, you 100% should be rewarded for knowledge. The question is, was the degree of the reward? Because if it is as high as like the point where, just knowing this makes like doubles your DPS, then like that means that like the way it means that the balance has to be like surely like monsters would have to be harder if that was the case. And so it's like, I don't think that can be something that like we don't want to have to make the monsters harder. So therefore, like we have to just be a little bit careful about that.
There's a fine line there for sure, but yeah, there's some improvements around here to be made, and there's some good takeaways from that anyway, right? Like when the determinism for sure, and I think it's also a matter of like, okay, I think there is a guaranteed rune from Ogden Village. Maybe that's too late. We should be doing that like earlier or having more of them. You know, again, more of that deterministic outcomes, but also maybe knowing that you're going to get that in advance would be helpful. I don't think we quite have that displayed. So it's like you know, some of those like the world map icons where you go and get a specific reward it's not necessarily explaining to the user what they're going to get, and so they might just be like, it's just another one of those. I don't need another tier 4 skill gem, but they don't. That's because maybe they think it's that. So yeah, bit of information improvements and a bit of just like some power adjustments, some more determinism, especially with Artificer's Orbs. I actually 100% agree with that. I think if we hadn't have added that system so late into the development, we would have actually put that more throughout 100% anyway, so we should just do it now. But yeah, well 100% some improvements there.
Another thing I'm curious about then, I asked about the skill tree. Do you feel like the skill tree gives a good, or does a good enough job of doing temporary solutions right now that you can later out gear, or like, is that something you'd be open to looking at?
Well, our core philosophy there was that the gear should give you base stats and the tree should multiply them, which makes the tree implicitly worse at then solving the problem. So the intention there is that, now whether or not, I would say we haven't really rediscussed it since then. I still believe that's a great thing to have.
There aren't the other thing that, just as a side note, is that there aren't runes that give you attributes, right?
Correct.
And so that means that you can't solve attribute requirements with runes, which is something that I brought up a bit ago, but like we didn't have time to look at what the implications of that were.
My sole fear with that is that it means that it is even harder now to replace an item with another item.
That is the concern.
Yeah, it is. That's why like something like 30 dex, 30 strength, etc. was obviously very nice in PoE 1. And it does feel a little bit like, oof, I wish I didn't have to take that, but that gives you like incentive to fix that through gear later. And obviously we have so much resist on the skill tree in PoE 1 too. I remember like, because the first time I played PoE 2, we didn't know anything about the skill tree and stuff like that. And I remember thinking, I was in like Act 2 somewhere, and I hadn't pre-planned my day. I hadn't like looked at the data mines or anything like that. So I was like, okay, let's go look at the skill tree where the resists are, because I'm like 10%, 15% on the different res, so I'll pick up 15 on the skill tree. And there was just that one in like warrior left start, and I was very surprised for that. So like, what's the reason for not having that much resist on the tree?
Because once again, as Mark said, the tree is the theory of it is that the tree enhances what your items are doing, in order to make the but I mean, look, there's something to think about again. Like, there might
100%.
be something to that we should be reconsidering.
Yeah.
Like
We'll 100% go have a discussion about this afterwards,
Right.
for sure. Like, I certainly have a whole bunch of thoughts on this real quick, and I just
Did you put it down?
Yeah, I definitely want to go over it and just reevaluate this, because like we did make a lot of these philosophical decisions, right? Where like tree should multiply, obviously aside from attributes, and gear should give the base, and like, you know, because an alternate solution might just be that the resistances given by the runes are like way too low as well, right? Like that certainly, because if you think of like the tree for one on obviously PoE 1, and you combine that with the crafting bench on PoE 1, like the amount of resistances you're getting there, even from the lowest tier crafts and the tree, is enough to certainly be able to solve any problem. So there's a little bit of just like making sure we don't want to make it too trivial. Well,
the other thing as well is that the monsters are balanced, assuming a different amount of resist than they were in PoE 1. So that like changes things a little bit as well. You know, like the expectation is not that you have like high resistances through the game necessarily. Like the expectation is that the expectation is that you should be able to get through from merely overcoming the negative resistances you get from going through the acts. Like if you're at 0%, you should be like that should be enough, and then any improvement you have over that is supposed to be just like something that's making your character better. But if the monster life or monster damage is not calibrated correctly, then it won't feel that way to the player. But like that was kind of like balancing around 0 was like another idea that we had to try and make it so that you always knew the amount of resistances you were supposed to have. Like being that like if the number is red, you need more, and if the number is not red, then you have enough. Like that was kind of the theory in order to make it more obvious, like what people are supposed to do there.
The other thing about the tree that can be a bit tricky here is that when you have that problem, like you probably have that problem immediately, where you're like,
By
oh,
what,
I'm dying
foxes?
to all this fire damage.
Oh, you don't
to
know.
this boss, I don't have enough fire resistance. The answer can't be like, okay, I need to look at my tree and get some fire resist, because that's too late, right? Like you need to solve this problem more immediately.
Right.
So having a more immediate solution is ideally what it would be. So ideally there you'd be like, okay, I'm going to swap this item for this item, and or maybe put this rune in, and now I might have another go and have a good time. Where if the answer is like, okay, there's resistance nodes over here, I just need to get 6 more levels so I can get them to then go and fight the boss. Like, I understand there's a level of like, obviously they're good at forward thinking problem solving, but like when you're like in the moment and you're like, damn, I'm struggling right now. What am I going to do right now? It needs to be a more immediate solution. And that's where the passive tree solves it in one regard, but doesn't solve it in another regard. And it's important that, yes, the runes are there to solve that problem and certain items are there. And sure, it's easy. it is not necessarily incorrect to say that hasn't.
I don't have enough decks. The irony. I need more decks and
readily
strength.
available as they should be.
Yeah. Yeah, I also think part of it is that we're definitely not dropping enough gear. Like the state of my gear, it's quite rough. Like a lot of the things I've found throughout the campaign ends up being 1 or 2 stat items, if that.
But isn't that just the? But like, okay, but this is the thing I would say about that is like, okay, when you're saying your gear isn't good enough, you're also just saying the monsters are too powerful. Like it can just be the monsters. Like I don't think that it needs, like, it. There's an element here of like you might just be conditioned to wearing rares in every slot all the time, which doesn't have to be the case.
Well,
like the gear power is entirely relative to monster power. So if you're saying your gear isn't good enough, it doesn't have to be the gear needs to get better. It can just be that the monsters are too hard.
Sure, if you're talking about also like damage and like I said speed, but okay, can you give me an idea then?
But that's
do you
important
think
though, because one of the things that PoE 2 has gotten us is that you're not just saturating on rares like halfway through Act 1 anymore. Like you actually do, and what that actually means is that you have situations where you change from a rare to a magic. In some cases, you're like changing around your gear through the campaign, and it results in way more like gear upgrades as you go through the campaign. Like there's way more often because you'll downgrade to a blue, but then you'll find a regal and you'll upgrade it, and then you'll add some more mods and so on. And like the amount of gear changes that are happening through the campaign is very, very high, and so. If we just dropped more gear, then we would lose out on that. And whereas if we lower monster power, then you're improving the like we wouldn't need to do that. And once again, that doesn't necessarily say that the gear is in exactly the right place. But what I am saying is that like it isn't just buff items. Like it is a question of player power relative to monster power.
But the thing is, like, we aren't switching out gear a lot though. I think a lot of us feel like we're like finally finding, let's say, like a glove with 60 life and 15 fire res, and then we end up keeping that all the way until max
all damage.
because we aren't really finding anything else. We have very little currency to craft with and stuff, and a lot of people also reported finding like a large chunk of the majority of their currency in Act 1, where maybe people will find as much as like 3 to 10 exalts in Act 1, and then find 0 in Act 2 and 3, so it seems like very, very early heavy.
I can't really explain why that would happen, because like the gear, like the way that loot drops doesn't change. The only thing that changes is the number of magic and rare monsters that exist. And so over time, the amount of loot you get increases through the game just because the number of rare and magic monsters increases. And due to the way the currency drops work in PoE 2, the more of those you get, the more rare currency you'll get, which means that like it just feels like you get more currency. So like that isn't a phenomenon that I understand for sure. Like you should be getting more currency as you go through the acts.
So, yeah, I would love to see.
Like, as far as I understand.
Several times I've been joking about making new characters to farm currency, and a lot of people.
I'd love to see a combat log.
Thankfully, we can relatively easily, if we need to, pretty much after this, add some logging for that and go and see what's actually happening.
But that is unusual. Like I can't explain why that would
I concur. There isn't. It shouldn't work that way. It shouldn't be that way. So if that is the case, which isn't necessarily true, but it could be. We're never going to rule out any bug or unintended thing where we can get some logging for that relatively fast and just check the data and actually see what's happening.
But I also do want to understand why some people feel like they get a lot of currency and others don't. Like I just don't understand what can be the responsible for that. Because like,
God exalted one.
It's like I wouldn't say that every time I want 6 mods I can get them, but I would say that I'm using exalts like all through the campaign. I'm using regals all through the campaign. I'm like rolling like from up from whites to rares like pretty continuously as you're going through. So like there's something odd about that I need to understand.
Yeah, I mean, even like I would say
Data.
myself, I got very like few regals and stuff to use. Like definitely was not on the rich end during the campaign.
Well, how many is a few?
I'd say through the campaign, I dropped probably 4 regals.
Well, hang on, but we're not talking about dropping only. We're talking about disenchanting too, right?
So, because of crafting being so RNG, I will generally have opted in. I've tried both, obviously, between like disenchanting, but I find that I benefit more from gambling than from actually trying to crafting. My experience with crafting is picking up every blue, looking for 1 stat, regaling, and then that missing and the item not being usable.
If you're not disenchanting rares, then you certainly won't get a lot of regals. Like
sure, but I've tried both.
All right. Well, I can't say much as to that, but like that is the reason you don't have regals if you're if you know, like that is where like the primary source of regals through the campaign would be disenchanting. Like that isn't to say that gambling isn't better. Maybe it is, but
right.
you know, like that it does explain that particular one currency item at least.
It's also quite a few alchemies and stuff as well.
Yeah, alchemies are kind
My
of
pain
not
point
really
is
intended
fucking
to be that
exalts,
common
dude.
anymore because
Exalts
the
are rough.
intended way to go through to rare is more via so like alchemies are like relative, like the alchemies are the kind of like, oh awesome, I got an alchemy. That's like a kind of that's the uncommon thing that you do occasionally, not the like kind of common workaday crafting that you're doing all the time. So like it should be that the regals are the primary source
one of the new ones.
of crafted rares.
Yeah.
In that regard.
Well, the good benefit here is we have so many players right now that we can just get some data and get some analytics very, very quickly about what this actually is.
What?
Yeah.
And you might find that it's just very sensitive to, you know, there's always just going to be a portion of unlucky players and a portion of lucky players. Like, I definitely know that there's a lot of swinginess, of course, and that can happen. And again, that it might just be that. And I know you've probably played more than most, so arguably you should have the you should have the least, the most amount of data from a purely anecdotal perspective. So, you know, you probably have the
20
best
orbs of
average
transmutation.
going on, the most accurate average.
200k gold to open.
We have the capacity to look into this very quickly, and we can just do so probably even today and figure out.
Oh no, I got them too. It's
what's
just
going
like you
on
need
and
a
we
lot
don't
of
know
them.
if it meets
That's all.
our expectations.
Are we Gamba?
So, the next thing I want to ask you about
That means the
is,
last one
the
would
element
be
thresholds.
fucking
You
like a
have,
million.
how easy it is for the player to be stunned, player to be frozen and stuff.
Oh, way more. No,
And I would say that feels a little bit overly punishing when we don't have as many
doing it.
solutions or tools,
I'll
right?
fucking
We
do
have one
it,
charm
chat.
slot, and it is
We can't
quite
open the last one,
difficult
though.
to get a second or third. And that's competing for
fucking
freeze immune,
crossbow.
stun immune, poison immune, ignite immune,
One's
and
2
chaos
million.
immune. Chaos resist and bleed. Now I would say poison,
it's
ignite,
worth
and
it.
bleed from the monsters don't actually do that much right now. But if it did, like, this would be a very, very heavily competed for, like, singular solution to doing anything with that. And as an addendum to the question, I wonder, would you consider letting belts get more implicit charm slots based on item level? So like maybe at like 50 plus they have 2, and at 81 they get 3. I
mean, we probably will increase the number of charm slots. Like that's something that we like kind of were intending to do and never got to yet. But I don't think that the ailment threshold was in the right place before.
How's this guy healing?
Effectively, ailments didn't
While
exist
stunned.
before we changed that.
What is this?
So like we needed something that was going to actually cause them to happen.
The fuck is this heal?
Like,
There's no way the first one was
during
leech.
the campaign before you got frozen like 3 times the whole campaign.
He's stunned.
It was a bit silly.
Do note we didn't actually universally double the stunning. I know you mentioned that just to
It
clear
was
that
only
up.
ailments that
The
changed, not stunning.
they stun you more as things get higher level. The expected
So it's
amount
not
of stun
back
threshold
left.
you should have goes up. So it's not, but it's pretty
potion?
minimal throughout the entire campaign. But what we also increased is the you gain a bunch of stun threshold when you get light stun, so you have way lower probability of getting stun locked. But then I would also point out, like, some of those charms just suck because it
Yeah.
doesn't even mitigate the stun that stunned you. And that is just something that we initially did, and they were like, oh, we need to change this, and then it just got
Like,
lost in
when
the
would you
weeds.
ever
So, like,
use this outside
the
of like
other thing is
5
changing
levels
those.
at the beginning
I don't know
of the
the
game?
resistance ones work
So
this way as
garbage.
well. Like those just need to also cancel out the thing that caused it, or mitigate the thing
Double
that
rarity
caused
of
it.
items,
And
man.
those where some do and some don't. So that needs to change 100%. And then yes, we need more slots. I think we're actually going to support up to 6 slots. That isn't to say that everyone will trivially have 6, but there is
But
UI
six
for
is,
it.
6 is only.
Yeah.
6 is a thing you might be able to do with uniques and stuff like that. It's not something that you
Yeah,
get.
yeah,
But
But it was certainly our expectation, or intention, I should say, that we give out more slots so that people are running more. Like 1 is not what you should be running. Like 2 certainly at high end minimum, and like probably 3 and like sometimes 4 wouldn't be unreasonable.
Okay.
But it's interesting
In what
that
sense,
even the
Cantaga?
ailment threshold change we made has not really affected most of the ailments that you just said. Like you just were saying that, like, you know, that bleed, poison, and stuff are not really doing much yet. And it's like,
Yeah.
like that wasn't even like even halving that number apparently wasn't enough to make those be a thing that you need to care about. Like only Frozen is the one that really kind of changed, I think, and like for the most part that you actually noticed. The stun thing is separate; it's not part of the ailment threshold change.
Yeah, I mean, but if
so
they did do a
but-
lot of damage, that'd be very overwhelming right now, and things we can deal with.
Well, but I mean, yeah, like it's not like we want it to be overwhelming.
It's a
but
bit of a
we want it
different.
to
It's a bit of a different game,
Right,
Like
but
when
we-
you get the mod and modifiers and map mods and everything
Right.
involved.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. But you know, it does need to happen sometimes in order for it to actually be something that's worth mitigating. So now we just need to
On
look at
Twitter,
the
I was just reading the
actual-
picture.
Yeah, the charm stuff as well.
And do you think the implicit will be tied to item level at all? So it'll be something that you don't necessarily have to
Wait, we already did
do
all
a
the
crazy
rares.
investment or
I
path
don't.
on the
like
tree?
being-
I don't know what the answer to that is. I have
Okay.
to think about how we want to introduce that. Like that is a one way. I mean, but there might be other ways. I just have to look at that.
The other thing is like charm. There's a level of like reviewing charms in general is just how, you know, aside from how many you have and not just their implicit, like their base value. There's also just like, I'd say a lot of the modifiers on them are just absolutely like nonsense. It's like, oh, recover 4 mana when it procs. It's like, okay, thanks. That's not a useful thing to happen. So there's a bunch of affixes there we just need to make better as well, and we may as well probably do that at the same time, unless of course it makes it take longer, in which we'd rather just get out the number of charms first. So yep.
Yeah. In PoE 1, we have masteries. I'm a huge fan of those, especially for temporary solutions.
What are
Is that
masteries?
something you're open to bringing back in PoE 2?
I'm not a huge fan of them because they ended up devaluing the notables a lot. Like the notables became really bland when masteries were introduced, and it's like, and it also means that like the where you are on the tree didn't matter as much either, which like kind of wasn't amazing. So
No
I think that we
integrity.
like
Oh,
prefer
the,
to
like,
have
middle
it be a
things.
situation where the notables are more interesting, and I do think that in PoE 2 the notables are very interesting. Like it's something that like I think that is notably good. So
More work
like,
to do there,
yeah,
though.
but
for
there is
sure.
more work to do. But I don't love the way that the masteries kind of like blandified the notables, and so yeah, I think we can. That's probably. I think I prefer it. Just putting the power in the notables rather than the masteries.
But I don't feel like they're directly competing at each other, right? You can still have like really interesting masteries and notables. Like those notables can still be super interesting.
I mean, there's only so many stats that
What are you poor? I'm gigaported.
that can exist, but I mean, look, fundamentally everything competes with every other thing because of the way that, like, you know, due to mod dilution. So like you have to, you know, you have to budget that in some level. Otherwise, you just get a situation where you've got so many effects on your character that like everything, that like nothing, no one thing matters at all. So like that's, you know, just.
I'm a bit more torn about this one personally because I do agree there are downsides, but on the other hand, it's the one that added it to PoE 1, so like I'm a little bit like.
Well, I don't think it was obvious at the time.
Yeah.
What downside that would have. I mean, that was certainly not something that I would be against.
There's
at all,
also
but-
just like the passive tree is like overwhelmingly complicated to people,
Right.
and so having this extra layer on
Jesus.
it was probably my biggest thing of like,
Right.
oh no, we made the thing that scares people the most more scary.
Right.
Because there's this extra layer that they have to, an extra keyword
That's
they have
insanely
to know
difficult to
about,
get
and
out
that
of
was
that,
my main thing
circle.
of like, maybe we should just simplify the thing that is like the scariest thing. Like that was a big argument to me.
Don't have enough run speed.
Oh, there are there's intermediary grounds there as well, but yeah, there's like downsides to it for sure. Like I agree. There's also maybe a way to make them work. I don't.
But I mean, what's the goal of it, right? Like, if the goal is to give you temporary solutions, then we don't necessarily have to solve it there. We could just solve it in a different place, and then it wouldn't be necessarily something
that is also true.
That's going to give you the downsides that we see that those ones having.
It's also just as a player, it is just very fun. Like I absolutely enjoy it. And it definitely, I can tell you, it does not make me feel like notables are devalued. I was even more exciting because you get it when you get the notable.
It's hard to identify that in the moment because like you don't notice the lack of something you don't notice the lack of something of what something could have been in the same way that you notice like the thing that's in front of you that you're enjoying. You know what I mean? Like it's harder to appreciate the fact that the notables are less cool in PoE 1.
Sure.
Like, because you're not thinking about that. You're thinking, I want the.
I mean, you can at least rest assured that we're going to think about why they were important and what we could do to solve them, whether it be that means or another. Like, the good thing about these is all of the things almost everything you bring up is going to result in some sort of multi-hour discussion between us over the next week. So
that's good.
Well, which is the huge benefit of these things for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, thank you for doing it. But the next one's something I care a lot about, especially as a hardcore player. Defenses seem very undertuned compared to offense, and just like anecdotally, if the two options, right? If we look at it in a bit of hyperbole, where I get to watch like tankiness be out of hand.
Is that the one after the Super Bowl?
Be out of hand. So like literally somebody walking up to a boss and one-shotting it, or looking at somebody standing there be immortal, right? I always think like if one should be out of hand, it's more interesting when the defensive one is out of hand. You still get to see the boss abilities and stuff like that. It seems so much easier always, and I think most patches have been like this, where it's always easier to scale offense rather than defense. And I wonder a little bit how you feel about that.
Well, you're not wrong that often the best defense is stacking all of the damage.
Yeah.
I mean, we've suffered from this for a long while. It is ultimately a consequence of just having the game be, like, again, talking about the hip firing and things be a bit unregulated with respect to the levels of uniques and builds and stuff going everywhere and hard to think of it all. And like, but it is generally true that we have more offensive. I guess people find damage in general to be more fun as an investment avenue.
That
for sure.
I actually didn't know that. Cares.
Thing
like on live on retail.
Most people would prefer to invest in offense generally.
I agree with that.
Mostly the case.
But then, shouldn't defense be even more encouraged then for the people that want to? Because even as a hardcore player, I almost feel like it's the opposite. Like anecdotally, for example, for point one, and full disclosure, I have not been able to get to Arbiter yet, right? We're very early in the league, so I don't know if you made them do less damage. But in point one, other people were doing some testing, and I asked softcore players to try a little bit, and there were people that were getting one-shot by Arbiter moves with 15k life. Some that are like kind of hard. So as a hardcore player, what I felt like then, I was like, well, and since I can't really tank, like there are multiple moves here that I can't tank, not just like one big telegraphed one shot, but there are multiple here that I can't tank. So what I did to over-prepare instead was I went in with so much damage that I just one-shot the boss, which is a little bit deflating for me. I would say Arbiter was one of the least fun bosses, whereas I would way rather go in and be so tanky that I can make a few mistakes, and then end up leaving.
I do want to know what their philosophy is
It's
on like
quite
the one shot stuff.
To split the difference between being tanky and being immortal. Like surprisingly hard to get that right. And when I say that, it's because you can regenerate life very quickly. And so if you don't die, like, okay, and the other thing as well is that boss abilities that do those big hits take a long time. Right, and like the bosses often can't hit you again.
Is that 40 different
afterwards.
buffs or like including
it's
stacks?
Like they'll do their big ability, and it's not like it's going to just immediately follow up with something that's going to chip you down either. So
yeah,
like,
but
if
we
you
can't
fail,
tank them.
No, but what I'm getting towards is that if
oh boy,
you don't have something that's going to do a lot of damage at the for those big hits. Like, we just have to be very careful, because like if like let's say that one of those big hits did only like, you know, a third of your life, you know, something like that. I don't think that then the boss would ever be able to kill you ever, because it would have to effectively be able to do 3 of those, like of those things before you can regenerate them. So what you're really asking for, and this is something we discussed a lot in the past, by the way, what you're asking for is for a more attrition-based gameplay style, like a more MMO style like thing.
So yeah,
and what you're really saying then is that you want flasks to do way less regeneration, and you want regeneration to be controlled way more in general, and then have a more attrition-based gameplay style. And that kind of just isn't a PoE way of doing things. Now, like, I mean, that could be a thing we could change to. Like, that would be an option that we would have, but it would be like, it would be the balance change of the universe. To
Let's
do
go
something
play
like that.
World
Like,
of Warcraft.
It would be a complete redesign of all the damage and like bosses and like the whole way everything works. Like change to more attrition style would just be like a you know, an apocalyptic level of balance change compared to what we have for sure.
I mean, I'm not 100% sure I agree with that, and I was going to ask, do you think the goal of a difficult boss should be to kill the player or to deny the player the loot?
I don't understand what that means.
So, when you're leaning more towards attrition-based gameplay, right? You're recognizing.
I feel like this was Zizard's moment where he's like, checkmate. They're like, what the fuck are you talking about?
I have to leave. I have to leave this fight. I'm not strong enough. As opposed to punching the player with death, you're already just taking away the loot anyway. There's not an XP loss anyway at the moment.